Challenge your ordinary. Experience the extraordinary.
Welcome back again. If you have just joined us, we welcome you. We're running on the last hour of our morning show. Obviously, this is your most favorite breakfast show right here on Pan African Morning. We are broadcasting live in Midrand. Let's give you the top stories as we continue. The High Court of South Africa has granted the National Bargaining Council for the road freight and the logistic industry and an interdict against the ATFD and the SA NCTDA from arranging and encouraging any other person to participate in the protest action in the national shutdown against the employment of foreign nationals in the road freight and logistic industry on the 7th of July 2020 or any other time. We are now joined by Mr. Brandon Shabangu here speaking to us with regards to the truck drivers. And maybe before we can get into that, we have to look into the fact that, the truck drivers have responded and said that any truck driver from Mozambique, Zimbabwe, the DRC, Nigeria, Tanzania, Swaziland, are saying that South African truck drivers within these foreign countries should go back to South Africa. They also are saying that there are no trucks that will be crossing their borders by 12 midnight on the 11th of July 2020, that is on Saturday. This is obviously in retaliation of what is happening. Mr. Chabangu, thank you so much for joining us on Galaxy Universal Network this morning. And of course, we are meeting on yet another issue that has to do with the foreigners.
Good morning, Sisanda and viewers at home. Indeed, we are meeting at such a heated moment in our country wherein the African brothers are at each other's necks once more.
Definitely. You are not just an attorney, but you're an author of a book, Minding Migrants. And you speak quite very much on a relationship in which how can maybe other countries, if you've got immigrants in your country, how can you make use of those opportunities to benefit you? However, we are in a country that has for many years been sparked by a very heavy criticism in terms of hiring foreigners. And we have seen a lot of xenophobic protest and taking place in our country due to the fact that South Africans are crying out and saying that these foreigners are taking their jobs. So what's your say in that?
The South African struggle for labor rights and the economic markets date back before 1994.
Yes.
I have before mentioned that there are at least 3 to 4 categories within which we need to look at this labor and economic division between South African and immigrants.
Yes.
I have said prior 1994, we had immigrants who came in this country to work in the mines as well as in the construction sector.
Yes.
And also in the long distance truck haulage. Come 1994, we had a lot, the second category, yes, of professional foreigners or immigrants who came in this country to work in universities as lecturers, as doctors, and so forth.
Yes.
That can be seen even today. If you go to any public hospital, even private hospital, you still get a significant number of professional foreign doctors, be it private or public hospitals, be it universities and high schools. And then come the era between the year 2000 and 2005, we now got an increased number of entrepreneurial migrants coming into South Africa to join the already 2 existing categories.
Yes.
So that's when then there was a beginning of a shrink in the informal sector, whereby the locals started to compete with foreigners even for the smaller opportunities. Lastly, you got the beyond the 2005 to now era, wherein the situation is so saturated to an extent that you cannot separate sugar from salt. What is the situation on the ground right now is that the people of South Africa have never had freedom to freely participate in the economy of the country.
Yeah.
From 1994 up to date, the South Africans are fighting. We thought that when apartheid ended and the democratic era began, South African will be given a proportional participation in the economy, and that is not the case. As we sit here today, 85% of the economic control of the country is held by the minority.
Yes.
Therefore, the majority of black South Africans are struggling within the remainder of the 10 to 15% together with immigrants.
Yes.
Therefore, it is that little percentage that is left that has now caused friction between South Africans and migrants, because they are all arguing and fighting for the same bread.
Yes.
I have, for instance, yesterday participated in conversations with people from the HEDF who are involved in the very same truck strike.
Yes.
They are saying they have South Africans who have never been employed since 1994. There are South Africans in this country who have had no formal employment since the advent of democracy. So South African frustration are not a thing of now.
Yeah.
South Africans have always been frustrated.
Can we say that probably it is still not just a mistake of the foreign migrants that are coming to the country to explore those opportunities, but rather an issue with our own government that is not opening the opportunities that are enough? Because I don't think that if the foreigners were not coming into the country, the South Africans would be occupying those spaces.
Look, to answer you directly, the lack of industrialization, the increase in import dependency, as well as the non-stopping unemployment rate is the cause to the situation that we find ourselves in. The more we close down our industries, for instance, we had a place called Isando. When I was growing up, we had most of the product written made in Isando. Isando is now a redundant area around Kempton Park. We rely so much to an importation of product to an extent that there is now a shrink in our employment sector. Therefore, this lack of industrialization is one of the blames. Secondly, you have South Africa being a member of SADC and other African bilateral agreements.
Yes.
Legalizing the exchange in different either product as well as migration policies. If you are to give African people permits to be in your country,
Yes.
if you are to legalize certain asylum seekers and refugees to be in your country, you equally need to enable them to work as well as to participate in the economic sectors.
Yes.
As things stand, South Africa is a member to all of these bilateral
Yes.
agreements and arrangements. Therefore, a South African who is in Nigeria is entitled to work in Nigeria if he meets the criteria and requirements.
Yes.
Equally applies to Nigerians or any other foreigner who is in South Africa legally, is entitled to the labor, employment, and entitlement as South Africans. The problem starts when we have illegal immigrants
Yes.
who are employed because of cheap labor. But otherwise, the problem that we have as a country is that of lack of industrialization, the quality of education. South Africans have not been, for lack of a better word, have not been educated on how to relate with other people from other countries. Pretty much because majority of South Africans are less traveled. Therefore, the education that we need, it should enable South Africans to know that there is competition in every sector, be it labor, be it business, even academia.
Yes. Can we say that maybe South Africa has created a state that has got a lot of dependence to the government? Because if we look into, I have a couple of friends that are owning restaurants, and they say that every time they obviously choose to hire South Africans, but every time they try to do that, South Africans are not able to cope with the working environments at the restaurants, and that's why you find a whole lot of people from outside South Africa taking up those jobs, because South Africans don't want those jobs. They want government to do them something better.
The labor matters involving migrants should be differentiated between the employer's perspective, the employee's perspective.
Yes.
If you look at it from the employer's perspective, you will indeed find that, one, majority of South Africans are unable to do certain jobs because of the pay. As a result, employers are saying they better resort on employing immigrants because they are cheaper. Secondly, it comes with, from the employer's perspective again, with what we call the work ethic. Majority of employees in this country who have employed foreigners, I have personally experienced it. You find that come month end or come Fridays, South Africans don't want to come to work. It has become common. It's either they are going to funerals, they are going to parties, they are going to weddings.
Died like 5 times a year.
Or whatever the case is. So the work ethic amongst the low entry level in our employment sector has always favored immigrants than locals because of South Africans have this tendency. We've caused it on ourselves, obviously, but it is there. We don't like to talk about it, but it is there. It has actually been termed as if South Africans are lazy. Again, when it comes to the employee's perspective, the South African employees, they are so used to this minimum wage. They are so termed on legislative requirements, like your Basic Condition of Employment Act, your Minimum Wage Act. They are quick to take an employer to the CCMA, by the way. That is known by the employees. But at the end of the day, these are conversations that we need to have as the people of South Africa. They are there. We don't like to talk about it, and we mostly deny them. I've had a situation where I personally had to close down a restaurant and a salon because South Africans don't want to work on commission. And if you don't get people working on commission in these sectors, you have no money to pay the employees. And that is the cry for most of the employees on the ground. So South Africans are a contributory factor to the situation, while at the same time the employers are unable to resolve the situation because, as I said earlier, the issue of not coming to work on weekends, not wanting to work longer hours, wanting higher pays and so forth.
Yeah, you know, I'm talking to a right person here because you are an employer as well. So I would want us to, you maybe stepping into the space where people don't want to talk about it. People are a little bit jittery in discussing the issues of finding South Africans in an employment space. Are South Africans feeling more entitled when it comes to workplaces? Do you feel that they feel that they're entitled to this and that, which is something that maybe the foreign nationals don't look into those entitlements?
The current statistics will tell that about 60% of the population of South Africa lives beyond the belt of poverty. That tells you now that there is a great number of unemployed South Africans amongst the black communities. As to whether they are entitled for work or entitled to any other right is something that I think we need to excuse from the discussion. What and how do you expect a country or a community wherein 60% of its people are unemployed, unemployable, and living beyond the poverty battle? So they are indeed going to be dependent on government, and they are indeed going to be a frustrated nation like we are. I wouldn't say they are entitled, and I will not say they are not entitled, but I will simply say poverty and inequality has driven the black majority of South Africans who find themselves in this dire situation to act unreasonably and irrationally.
Is it a different type of poverty, Brendan? Because if we look into this, we find someone that maybe the similar situation for someone coming from Zimbabwe, for an example, or Mozambique, and those people, they are in a same situation, a same condition with the person who's a South African, but that person will thrive more, will actually work more and trying to do more things than a South African. do we maybe understand poverty in our country differently from what other people outside of this country would actually be taking as poverty?
I will differ that the situation of a Zimbabwean in South Africa be compared and be said to be the same to that of a South African in South Africa. Rather, judge how other South Africans in the diaspora outside of South Africa would behave in the situation. And I can tell you that a South African in Zimbabwe, a South African in Nigeria is striving as hard as a foreigner in South Africa. So the situation cannot be domestically compared. It can never be the same.
Okay, now let us look into South Africans outside of the country, because this is something that I think I've seen that a lot of South Africans obviously do not travel a lot to get to see how life is outside of the country. They always, you know, stick to what's happening within the country, which then obviously brings some kind of issues, because they will say, yeah, if you decided to go there, then face your problem, but we don't want them to come into our countries. And people don't get to understand that some people go out of South Africa to even Zimbabwe for better opportunities. And we find ourselves in a situation where we don't really know which one we need to do. At what stage, maybe in your experience, that you believe that people leave their countries or leave South Africa, if you can make clarity on that, leave South Africa, for an example, to go look for better opportunities outside? Because I think this is what we need to understand before we start maybe, you know, saying these people must leave our country.
Let me start off by saying it is not correct that, especially now, South Africans are less traveled. There is a high increase in South Africans who are traveling out of South Africa for economic reasons to other countries. I've met South Africans in Kenya, I've met South Africans in Ethiopia, I've met South Africans in Australia, I've met South Africans in China.
Yes.
These are people who cannot be judged the same way we judged the generation of prior 94 up to the year 2000.
Yes.
There are indeed growing economic reasons that have pushed South Africans to look for greener pastures elsewhere, and there are South Africans who are doing well outside the borders of South Africa.
Now let us look into this issue of xenophobic attacks that commonly happen in this country. I have a feeling, you know, that it is a fight against the color, because these xenophobic attacks, they are not directed to the Chinese people that come in here and start businesses, but they are directed to either maybe either Somalians or Nigerians that are owning local spaza shops and stuff like that. Are we having a problem with our own African brothers and sisters, or is just a matter of a color, or maybe a lack of understanding, and who exactly is a foreigner?
The issue of Afrophobia, as I term it, is derived from the deficit in our education system. I have said earlier that when South Africa acquired its democracy, one of our inabilities was to convert and to contribute into our education system to prepare a South African for the increase in migration, in particular immigration, because South Africa became a beacon of democracy. Once South Africa attained that status, it attracted different foreigners from all over the world. Unfortunately, because of the economic setup of the country, whereby the white people are in charge of the economy, a foreigner has always been seen to be an African. A white person from Denmark is not considered a foreigner by a fellow black person. When I was growing up in Carolina, there was a time when Chinese people were building pipes, you know, the pipe that transferred diesel from Mozambique to South Africa. Those Chinese were worshipped. In fact, it was the first time we were seeing Chinese in the early 2000s. And black South Africans embraced them. We loved them. But that treatment and that harmony has never been afforded to a fellow African because of the lack of African education to create harmony among the African people. That is one of the reasons why I'm saying today, psychologically, we are imbalanced as the black people of the continent, because the biggest enemy we have amongst ourselves is a fellow black person. That is something that the governments in Africa need to spend money on. They don't need to spend money to attend your Geneva Conventions and to attend other European
Yes.
conferences, yet they are unable to unite the African brothers in the continent. As a result, I have come to a conclusion that phenomena such as xenophobia or Afrophobia
Yeah.
are one of the agendas that are pushed to ensure that the black people in Africa continue to suffer. And I can give you reasons why I'm saying
Yes, I was about to
xenophobia
ask that.
is an agenda.
Yes, yes.
One, you must notice that every time these actions of attacks between foreigners and South Africans happen, one, you get that the people behind this, they will hide either against the lack of jobs. When you look on the situation closely, you realize that the majority of the work sector in South Africa is predominantly run by South Africans. The majority of employment in this country is South Africans. Right now, I heard that the truck drivers who are on protest because of foreigners who are in the trucking sector, I can assure you now that the Department of Labor, I think between 2015 and 2018, did a study. And they said not more than 15% of truck drivers in this country are foreigners. Are you telling me that the 85% of drivers who may be South Africans can be so aggrieved that 15% in the industry are foreigners? I don't think that's the case. There is an agenda to ensure that an African state is ungovernable.
Who might, in your understanding or your view, who might be driving these agendas?
Look, at the end of the day, I might not say who. And as a result, I say this is my conclusion when I look at the situation closely. It cannot be that you get African people fighting for crumbs while they see that the real bread in front of them is touched by certain people. It cannot be. This is one of the agendas that are being pushed against the black people and to ensure that the African people are seen as unable to govern themselves.
Before we can go on break, Brendan, we've got a response, of course, from the other truck drivers outside of the country, of course, in some of the countries that are put in place, your Zimbabwe, your Malawis, or, you know, all these SADC countries. They are saying they don't want South Africans now to be driving on the other side, and they are calling for a total shutdown of South African businesses outside of South Africa. What is your view in that? Do you think now we are obviously sparking the very same thing that happened, in Nigeria, seeing the likes of MTN stores, ShopRites being looted and shut down because of all these minor issues that start in our own country?
Again, every action calls for reaction.
Of course.
The so-called threats that you are saying are nothing but a reaction to the situation on the ground.
Yes.
And these reactions, if you can look at them, are also being pushed by certain persons in form of either organizations. It's not the people of Zimbabwe who are saying we're going to block South African drivers from coming. No. This thing is an organized guerrilla tactics that are made to make sure that the African people can never unite and they can never have a solidarity for a certain cause. We are now under one, facing the pandemic coronavirus.
Yes.
Two, we recently had a scourge of gender violence cases that were going on.
Yes.
When these things, they seem to harmonize, something else comes up. I will tell you, and I repeat, these are nothing but guerrilla agents to ensure that the black community is seen to be unable to govern itself.
When we're coming back from the break, I would want us to discuss the United Africa and if it is possible indeed to have a United Africa. Of course, the EFF has said that they would want, they've always positioned themselves as the political party that represents the entire African continent. Stay with us as we take a very short break. We'll be back with you right here on Pan African Morning.
Challenge your ordinary. Experience the extraordinary.
Not only the government, the municipality here has had no plan.
Now, I believe that my peace is my most valuable asset.
Absolutely beautiful!
This is exactly what I was looking for!
DJ Khaled!
It is a day to celebrate.
We're ready for action.
I like it when it's nice and soft. Yeah, that is nice.
How was it like growing up in Nigeria? Yes, sir, you know what it is.
Feeling is there that, you're doing something special.
Stop being so dramatic, Mira.
You should just be what you want to be.
Experience the extraordinary with Starsat.
Welcome back again. We're still right here on Pan-African Morning. Of course, I am with Brendan Shabangu, joining us at the studio, discussing about, the United Africa, if it does even exist. Now, looking into this story deeper, the economic freedom fighters say that they note the national strike by truck drivers in South Africa, and they are saying that the party says that they condemn any violence against truck drivers who come from various parts of the African continent. The EFF says that they are drivers, that they are allowed to undertake protest, but they should be done that should be done in dignity. They continue to say that the companies should not jeopardize the intercontinental trade, and South Africa will not survive without a trucking industry that with the truck industry that only operates within the borders of South Africa. Brendan, we spoke about it earlier that EFF has always positioned itself in a space where they are being regarded as the country for Africa. They are representing the African people. And I would stand to differ right here. I'm not sure if you would, have a different view on this one, to say, I have seen EFF speaking quite very differently in terms of making sure that they look at the interest of, African people. But then at the very same time, they always say they need to bring the interest of South Africans first, which is a little bit contradictory to one another in there. But now, a standard South African, it will be sitting there and say, yes, how about we start looking at the interest of the people of South Africa first, prior to looking at the interest of other African people. What do you have to say about that?
If you are from South Africa, you will know that there is a historical relationship between South African exilees and the African continent.
Yes.
There is a general expression that says the Africans exclude South Africans.
Yes.
This is what is happening in most of the townships. People think when they see somebody from Gabon is from Africa. They say somebody from Cameroon is from Africa, as if South Africa is not in Africa.
It's not part of Africa, that's true.
What the EFF, I do not know if it's the EFF, but I have heard Julius Malema from time to time advocating the interest of the Africa in general.
Yes.
There is a need to find common grounds between Africans. The African states, all 54 of them,
yes,
have a similar challenge. And that challenge is that, one, they have all been subdued economically by colonies.
Yes.
They were colonized, all of them. And now that we are living after the so-called colonial era or the post-colonial era, Africa has not defined itself as to what the independence that they have fought for brings for its people. If you look at the instabilities in Congo, for example,
yes,
it's one of the countries that has the biggest mineral that I'm told can accommodate the entire African continent. If you were to ask a question, out of the African engineers, who sees cobalt being exported from Congo to the USA or Germany, what resonates in their mind? We need to find a solution for Africa when it comes to the issue of scarcity of clean water. We have water engineers who have been trained in different European countries. Yet in Africa, we still have problem with clean water. We have a problem of environmental pollution in the very same continent. Yet we have right now, post the colonial era, engineers, both black and white, that can serve the continent. But the bigger elephant in the room, is there a political will to unite Africa, not to have one Africa? I'm talking in a sense of uniting Africa in a geopolitical relation. If you go to Asia, for instance, the moment you have a visa to China, nothing stops you from spending a night or two in Hong Kong. Nothing stops you from spending a night or two in Taiwan.
In Taiwan, yes.
These are what we call Asian relation agreements that have been reached. But I am unable to go from South Africa and spend a night or two in Kenya without being subjected to useless visa rules that makes no sense. What opportunities are available for me as a South African just next door in Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe has almost every mineral that South Africa has. We are unable, as we sit here, to even have one mining company doing business successfully in Zimbabwe. They will say no, because Zimbabwe has no money, because Zimbabwe, due to the embargoes that were pressed on them by the West. Yes. The question, fine, the West has pressed embargoes in Zimbabwe. But what stops South Africa from saying, fine, as South Africa, as SADC, we will come together and make sure that Zimbabwe works. The minerals in Zimbabwe can benefit SADC greatly. It can employ almost half of the population of SADC. Yeah. I'm talking about the coal mining and so forth and on. The exchange labor policies that are in place could play a vital role in ensuring that Zimbabwe works, Botswana works, South Africa works, but there is no political will.
We have, of course, the Schengen, where the Schengen countries, where the European countries that come together. Earlier on, you mentioned as to why Africa would not have a similar way of doing things, that you get just one visa and go all across Africa. And you put a very important point that the issue is a political rule. That takes us now back into Mpumalanga. Now, yesterday we have seen a whole lot of issues that were happening in Mpumalanga. Roads were blocked, trucks were banned, were satellites, and people got injured, and a lot of people were picketing, road closed, and businesses being affected, of course, due to the fact that people are saying, we don't want these Africans that are taking our jobs. We don't want them to be in our country. Now, the issue that we are facing, of course, which is the political leadership that will drive the narrative of one Africa, for one. But the business sector is also the one that is also not contributing positively in creating one Africa, because there are a lot of red tapes as well, which creates anger, in my view, to South Africans to say how. But there are all these requirements for these foreigners to work here, and they still come in and work nonetheless. How do they get these jobs that we fail to get while we are here in South Africa? Then the fights begin. How do we, try and find clarity around these things on how it is easy for foreigners to come into the country, find employment, while there are South Africans, you mentioned earlier, that they've been unemployed since 1994?
Well, I'm going to tell you a practical situation. A truck, a 34-ton truck, may cost anything between 2 million to 3 million rands. And there is no owner of a truck who will just give a truck to a foreigner or an immigrant just for the sake of it, or because he's a foreigner. There are procedures that are being undertaken before a truck driver is employed. I have personally participated in some of this testing, whereby I've seen how our brothers, this is a truth that we don't want to talk about, how our brothers are given an opportunity to reverse a truck and they fail. And there comes a Botswana or a Lesotho person with a legit permit to work in South Africa. He reverses the truck, he does everything right. Reverse and parks, and he does it right. And in one meeting that I had with the ATDF last year, we discussed the possibility of some of our South Africans having bought these driving licenses. I do not know whether the ease in getting a Code 14 driving license has been made more easier than between foreigners and a practical failure when it comes to testing. I personally witnessed 2 Lesotho people reversing and parking a truck properly, and they got a job. And I ask these persons and say, what is the problem? You brought 6 South Africans against 2 Lesotho nationals, and they were given a truck, but they could not do the job. We leave that. We don't talk about this. So what I'm trying to ask is, are these South Africans who carry Code 14 driving license competent truck drivers, first of all? To carry a driving license does not make you competent to drive. It does not mean you can drive that thing. So, 2, coming to the issue of strikes, I have personally witnessed these people in these protests and these strikes, they wearing branded T-shirts. Who financed these T-shirts? Where are these T-shirts coming from? So yesterday, I witnessed boxes of KFCs being given to these people who are striking. Where are these KFCs come from?
Yes.
That tells you that there is something beyond these unrests that are too difficult for us to conceive.
So basically, we need to wake up as Africans and see that there is someone, in Zulu we say, inside, that comes in and try to, to smear the relations that we have as Africans, and trying to bring in, as you posing the questions rightly so, as to who might be responsible in financing these people, who might be responsible in, getting those T-shirts, because I don't think that any of them can actually make money to put on those T-shirts.
Look, if it's a group of unemployed truck drivers, right, will they be able to contribute 30 rands to go and print a T-shirt each?
No. And also still contribute in buying the T-shirts themselves, because they still have to buy the T-shirts. So we're looking at about maybe $100 each person in there on each and every on that T-shirt. It's a very, very difficult situation that we find ourselves in, Brendan. However, I would want us to now maybe go back to a stage where we talk about South Africans as to how can we then help? Because we see that there are a whole lot of South Africans that are complaining and crying each and every day. And on the recent statistics, they actually did mention that a lot of South Africans have also just stopped trying to look for employment because they have given up. What can we do? What can we say to South Africans out there that have lost hope because they have got this mentality that, anyway, even if I can go there, foreigners will get that opportunity and not me?
There are 3 categories of South Africans in the employment space.
Yes.
There are South Africans who are employable and educated. There are South Africans who are educated and unemployable. And there are South Africans who are uneducated and unemployable. So when we look on this issue of employment versus unemployment, we should not use the same brush to paint the same picture.
Yes.
South Africans as a group, you and I sitting here, we can contribute to a solution by, 1, creating a solidarity that will advocate and look for the interest of a certain category of black people on a certain sector. For example, if lawyers in this country were to say, lawyers in Mpumalanga, we will participate in training law students who are unable to get articles. And at the same time, the law students say we will be able to position ourselves for voluntary jobs in these law firms without being paid. In that case, you are making yourself employable.
Employable, yes.
Because you don't just have a degree and then you say you're employable.
You need to have
Experience is important behind it.
Yes.
So we need to have a work sector that enables, one, the graduates to participate on a voluntary basis,
yes,
and to at the same time on a stipend basis. These things must be formalized all across boards. And when it comes to the other sectors of our economy, for example, like the informal sector,
yes,
if we can have legislation that says the small businesses be reserved for a certain number of South Africans against the number of foreigners. And those South Africans be trained, because to run a mini shop, spice shop or supermarket is not the same as it was 20 years ago.
yes.
So we need a general training on those minor businesses on the ground, so forth and so on. In that way, we will create a solidarity group of people that can be able to empower each other instead of depending on government to empower them.
You have said a mouthful, Mr. Chabangwe. Thank you so much for being part of this show. We definitely would want to keep bringing you back, because I think you're making quite very important points in terms of solutions that needs to be taken in moving Africa forward. In closing, what's your message?
Well, we need to find ourselves as South Africans as well as Africans. We are struggling as a continent, and we are struggling as a country in a continent. The problems that we see in South Africa are going to haunt the next coming generation if we don't take serious steps now to, one, unite the people in our African countries first. I do not preach and ask for the United States of Africa, but I'm saying each and every African country needs to find itself and to create a harmonious world within which the African people can live. There ought to be legislations. The Department of Home Affairs need to pull up its socks in legalizing and also bringing to account the foreigners who are undocumented. The deportation system needs to be effective. The adjudication system of immigrants need to be effective. The border control measures need to be effective. The South African Police Service need to ensure that foreigners who participate in wrongdoing, majority of street drugs that are sold by foreigners and local are at the behest of South African members who know them, but they're doing nothing. Our political representative need to take a stand that is there to ensure that harmony, lawful legality be at the forefront. In that way, as long as you have this scourge of criminal activities taking place in our corners, you are not going to be able to solve the next bigger problem.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chabangwe. Where do we find you?
Well, you'll find me at Galaxy.
No, definitely, you will get him here on Galaxy. Of course, we'll show his social media platforms.